I never thought betrayal could sound so ordinary, spoken in the same calm tone someone might use to read the weather. Yet there it was, slipping from the mouth of the very man I brought into this world, my own son. I had gone to the hallway quietly, moving slower than usual, because I had forgotten my glasses in the living room. It should have been nothing, just another small errand in a day full of silences. But then I heard it, the word that cut deeper than anything I had faced in all my 76 years. Betrayed. He didn't say it to me, not directly, but about me, as if I were some figure on trial, guilty without defense. The voices carried easily from the kitchen. My daughter-in-law's sharp whisper came first, quick and impatient. "She's draining us, Michael. We can't keep doing this forever." Then his voice, my son's voice, the same voice that once begged me for one more bedtime story, one more song before sleep. "I know. She's not giving anything back. She's just here, living, eating, sleeping, but nothing else. It's like she doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it's time to move on." My knees nearly gave out. The wall felt suddenly cold against my hand, and every bone in my body turned heavy. I had always imagined betrayal as a dramatic thunderclap, but it was nothing like that. It was quiet, unremarkable, yet it rang louder than any storm. Betrayed. That single word wrapped itself around my chest until breathing felt like a punishment. I stayed frozen, afraid to step forward, afraid to make a sound. Part of me hoped I had misheard, that it was some cruel coincidence of words. But then I heard laughter, soft, quick, from my granddaughter. "Maybe we should just put her away," she said, almost playfully, as if my life were a piece of clutter they could store in the attic. The air disappeared from the room. I wanted to scream, to burst through that door and remind them of every meal I cooked, every sickness I nursed, every tear I wiped from their faces when they were small. I wanted to demand they remembered that this so-called burden was the reason they had a home to stand in, the reason they knew love at all. But I couldn't. My throat locked. My hands shook. I stood there, listening to my own erasure. It was strange, the way betrayal works. It doesn't just strike in the moment, it digs up every sacrifice you ever made, every night you stayed awake praying for their safety, every dream you pushed aside so they could chase theirs. It turns all of that into dust, leaving you with nothing but the echo of your own foolish faith. If this story touched you from the beginning, leave a like now. This really helps the channel reach more people. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I pressed my back against the wall, praying for the strength not to collapse. The betrayal didn't just come from my son's words, it came from the silence that followed. No one defended me. No one said, "That's not true." Instead, they spoke as if I were invisible, as if I were already gone. And then came the worst part. My son's final words before footsteps echoed across the kitchen floor. "She's not the mother I remember. She's just nothing now." That was the knife. Not just betrayal, but annihilation. To be called nothing by the one who once clung to my hand in fear of the dark, who once whispered, "Don't leave me, Mama." Now he was the one leaving me, not with distance, but with words sharp enough to strip me of existence itself. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who once swore they would always love you? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes the stories we share are the very sparks that lead us to reclaim our worth and transform the life we thought was already over. My name is Eleanor. I'm 76 years old, and once I was the woman who held everything together in this family. I wasn't simply present in the background. I was the foundation on which everything stood. I was the one who remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every small achievement worth celebrating. I was the person who carried the weight of other people's fears, who turned chaos into order and silence into laughter. People came to me for advice, for comfort, for reassurance that they were not alone in their struggles, and I never failed them. My life was built on responsibility, but it wasn't a burden, then it was an honor, because I was respected, needed, loved. Or at least I believed I was. I was the matriarch, not in the sense of power, but in the sense of presence. My voice carried weight in every decision, not because I demanded it, but because I had proven my wisdom through decades of sacrifices. I had built a life with Richard, my husband, a man who never let me doubt that I mattered. Together we raised our son, poured into him our best years, our best strength, our best love. When Richard was alive, our home was not just for walls. It was a place filled with meaning, with Dignity, with the sense that every person in it was valued. People leaned on me then, because they knew I would never let them fall. And when Richard passed, I thought my role would remain the same, only quieter. I thought love and respect didn't die with a spouse. I thought family would step in where he left off. I was wrong. The day I buried my husband was the day a chapter closed forever, though I didn't see it at first. My son Michael and his wife Rachel insisted that I move in with them. At first, I thought it was an act of love, a natural extension of family bonds. "You won't be alone, Mom," Michael said, and those words felt like a lifeline. I believed him. I believed that being surrounded by my son and my grandchildren would heal the loneliness that grief left behind. I brought with me only a few belongings: my rocking chair, the photograph of Richard and me on our wedding day, the quilt my mother sewed when I was young. I stepped into their house thinking it would be a continuation of the home I had lost. But slowly, I realized I had only walked into a new kind of loneliness, one where I was present but no longer seen. In the beginning, I tried to make myself useful. I cooked, I cleaned, I folded laundry, I helped the children with school projects. I poured the same energy into their household that I had once given my own. I believed effort would be met with gratitude, that presence would be rewarded with belonging. But as the days passed, I noticed a shift. My meals were too salty, my stories were too long, my presence at the dinner table was quietly ignored. Little by little, I was corrected, dismissed, reduced to the shadow of the woman I once was. The matriarch became a guest. The guest became an inconvenience, and the inconvenience, eventually, became invisible. It is a strange thing to go from being the center of a family to being treated as an afterthought. There was a time when my advice was sought eagerly, when my voice was trusted, above all. But now, conversations happened around me, not with me. Decisions were made without my input, and when I dared to speak, it was as if my words evaporated in the air. I could sit in the same room and still feel like I wasn't truly there. Respect, once freely given, was replaced with indifference, and indifference is colder than hate. Hate burns, but indifference erases. Now, I want to pause and ask you something. Agora me diga, da onde você está assistindo este vídeo? Qual VRA? Onde essa história chega? I kept trying to hold on to fragments of the life I once knew. I baked pies on Sundays, like I always did. I hummed the same lullabies Richard used to love, hoping someone might recognize the sound of home in my voice. But they didn't. My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes when I forgot small things. My son brushed off my attempts to help, saying, "It's fine, Mom. I'll handle it," but the tone was sharp, not tender. And the children, the ones I once cradled in my arms, the ones who clung to me when they scraped their knees, began to look at me with impatience instead of affection. They grew up, and in their eyes, I grew useless. There were days I sat by the window, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the birds outside. It was easier to watch creatures that expected nothing from me than to face the people in the house who looked at me as though I had already expired. I used to believe that age brought honor, that years of sacrifice earned you a seat of respect, but I learned that in some houses, age is treated as a nuisance, not a crown. And nothing humbles you more than realizing that your presence, which once anchored a family, now feels like an intrusion in the very home you thought was your refuge. This is the cruelty of betrayal. It does not begin with a single act. It begins with small dismissals, subtle corrections, silent exclusions. It begins with being left out of conversations, being forgotten at dinner, being corrected like a child. It begins with the erosion of dignity, until the person you once were is no longer reflected in the eyes of the people you love. That is what I lived every day after stepping into that house. I went from Eleanor, the matriarch, the respected mother and grandmother, to Eleanor, the old woman in the chair by the window, the one no one bothered to greet. And yet, I held on to the belief that surely, someone would remember, that surely, the sacrifices of a lifetime could not be erased so easily. But as each day passed, the silence grew louder, and the distance thicker. And I began to wonder if perhaps I had been wrong all along. Have you ever felt that shift in your own life, when everything you built, every ounce of respect you once commanded, begins to fade in the eyes of those you love most? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the moment you share your truth becomes the first step toward reclaiming the dignity they tried to take away. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Families get busy, I told myself. People whisper sometimes because not every conversation is meant to be shared. But soon the whispers weren't occasional, they were constant, and worse than that, they always stopped the moment I entered a room. I could feel it, the air tightening, the eyes shifting, the silence falling heavy as though my presence spoiled the scene. My son and his wife had mastered the art of speaking just low enough to make me strain to hear, yet loud enough that I knew I was the subject. There is nothing more humiliating than realizing your life has become a topic of negotiation while you are still breathing, still alive, still perfectly capable of hearing the verdict being passed. I began to notice the small signs first. Papers on the table quickly tucked away when I approached. Receipts hidden in drawers I was told not to open. Conversations that ended abruptly with the words, "We'll talk later," followed by glances that made me feel like an intruder in a home I was supposed to belong to. One night, I heard Rachel, my daughter-in-law, mutter, "If we sell now, we could finally get ahead." My heart skipped. Sell what? I froze in the hallway, pressing myself against the wall, and then I heard Michael's voice, calm, almost resigned. "We'll figure it out. She doesn't have to know yet." That's what I had become. Not Eleanor, not Mom, not the woman who carried him through fevers and heartbreaks and endless nights of sacrifice. Just she. A problem to be solved, a barrier to their plans. The word betrayal carries a weight that burns slowly, but what stings even more is the reduction of your existence into a burden, into an object. They were not speaking of me as a person. They were speaking of me as if I were furniture, something heavy, inconvenient, standing in the way of their vision for a better life. I was no longer part of their story. I was an obstacle to be removed. The worst moments were not the words themselves, but the indifference of the ones I thought might still defend me. My granddaughter, once sweet and affectionate, began to pull away. She laughed when Rachel made dismissive comments about me. I saw it, the quick smirk, the roll of her eyes, the way she leaned into her mother's side as if joining in an unspoken alliance. My grandson, the younger one, still kept a distance, but even he avoided my gaze at times, perhaps too afraid to oppose his parents. Their silence spoke louder than any insult. Indifference is a wound, sharper than mockery, because it tells you that you are not worth even the effort of cruelty. I remember one evening vividly. They were sitting at the dining table, papers spread out, their heads bent close. I walked in slowly, carrying a folded towel I had just ironed, pretending to busy myself with chores to justify my existence. The moment they noticed me, Rachel slid the papers into a folder and closed it firmly. Michael cleared his throat. "Nothing to worry about, Mom," he said. His tone was smooth, but his eyes avoided mine. That avoidance was worse than an outright lie, because it confirmed the truth. They were planning something, and it involved me. What they didn't realize was that even when people try to hide their schemes, their body language screams the truth. I saw the quick exchange of glances, the subtle nods, the way Rachel's lips curved in satisfaction when she thought I wasn't looking. They were building a future, and in that future, I had no place. Do you know what it feels like to live in a house where your very existence is treated like clutter? To sit in a chair in the living room and feel the energy shift the moment you enter. To be spoken about as though you were an object that could be moved, sold, discarded. It strips away not just dignity, but identity. And the cruelest part is how ordinary they make it seem. They don't scream, they don't rage. Instead, they chip away at you piece by piece, until you begin to wonder if maybe they are right. At times, I caught my reflection in the window, an old woman sitting quietly, hands folded, face tired. I wondered if they looked at me and saw the same image. Did they see me as already gone? Did they convince themselves I was no longer capable, no longer worthy, no longer human enough to be considered in their plans? That is the slow death of betrayal, not the sudden act of treachery, but the steady erosion of your worth in the eyes of those you raised. I tried to remind myself of who I once was. I had been the woman who ran bake sales, who managed finances, who spoke at community meetings with a voice that carried respect. I had been the one people called for advice, the one people leaned on when their world felt unstable. And yet here I was, tiptoeing around my own son's house, overhearing conversations about selling my home, my possessions, my history, as if I were a piece of paper to be signed away. The net result of their whispers was not just suspicion, but a heavy ache in my chest that lingered long after the words stopped. Silence filled the house, not a peaceful silence, but a suffocating one. the kind where you know you are not welcome, but no one has the courage to say it aloud. I felt myself shrinking, my voice quieting, my steps slower, as though by minimizing myself I could delay the inevitable. And all the while, the grandchildren, those who once came to me for bedtime stories and cookies fresh from the oven, remained silent. Their laughter no longer included me, their words no longer sought me. That indifference carved deeper wounds than the betrayal of my son, because it proved that respect is not inherited, it must be chosen. And in their silence, they had chosen to erase me. Have you ever experienced that silence? The kind that hurts more than sharp words, the kind that tells you without saying a thing that you no longer matter. You believe the dagger is in the insult, but in truth, the silence is what makes you bleed the longest. Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the silence we expose is the first step in reclaiming the voice they tried to take from us. The moment of humiliation did not arrive with a whisper. It arrived with the weight of a hammer, breaking whatever fragile hope I still held inside me. It was a Sunday evening, one of those nights when the house was filled with noise, the television humming in the background, the smell of food on the table, and the careless laughter of people who believe their comfort is permanent. I was sitting quietly at the corner of the dining room, the chair I had slowly come to occupy every evening. It was not a seat offered with respect, but a place I chose because it was far enough to avoid being in the way, and close enough to pretend I still belonged. Dinner was nearly ready. I had tried to help, but Rachel had waved me off with that dismissive hand gesture I had come to recognize too well. "I've got it," she said, as if my offering was not kindness but interference. I sat, hands folded in my lap, waiting for the call to join them. When the table was finally set, Michael came in with a tired expression, carrying his plate as if the food had been handed to him by invisible hands. They all sat, the chairs filling quickly, the chatter rising, the energy flowing. And then, when I attempted to stand and approach the table, my son's voice cut through the air. "Just sit down, Mom. You're only going to make a mess." I froze. His words struck with a sharpness I hadn't expected. They silenced me in front of everyone, stripped me of dignity with a single sentence. The room stilled for a moment, and then I heard the laughter. Rachel covered her mouth, as if hiding amusement, while my granddaughter let out a clear giggle. It wasn't nervous laughter. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, and it cut through me with precision. That sound mockery from my own blood echoed louder than any insult. The truth of my invisibility was laid bare at that table. I was not a mother, not a grandmother, not a woman who had spent decades holding the very people who now discarded me. I was, in their eyes, an inconvenience, a joke, an object to be laughed at when I reached for a place at the table I once ruled. I lowered myself back into my chair, each movement heavy with humiliation. My cheeks burned, not just from embarrassment but from rage I had no voice to release. My fork trembled in my hand. Though I wasn't holding any food, my appetite had vanished, replaced by the bitter taste of betrayal and shame. They continued eating, their laughter spilling into other topics, their voices weaving around me like a net designed to exclude. I was there, but I was erased. I thought of the countless meals I had prepared in my lifetime, the birthdays where I cooked from dawn until dusk, the nights when Richard and I stayed up late baking cookies for Michael's school projects, the mornings I rushed to pack lunches when money was tight. I had fed them, nurtured them, carried them, and now I was being told, with one cruel sentence, that I was incapable, useless, better off, silent. That is the cruelty of humiliation. Does not just wound your pride, it desecrates your history. Rachel's voice rang out again, sweetly venomous. "Don't worry, Eleanor. Just enjoy yourself. You've earned your rest." But her smirk betrayed the words. They weren't meant to honor me. They were meant to bury me under the label of irrelevance. My granddaughter nodded, smirking, her eyes glinting with the same careless superiority they had learned well from their parents. The cycle of disrespect had been passed down like an inheritance of cruelty. I felt the walls of the house close in on me. I had once walked those very rooms as a queen of small victories, a woman whose presence brought order and comfort. Now, I was nothing but a shadow haunting the corners, allowed to exist only if I stayed quiet enough, small enough, invisible enough. There is a kind of humiliation that doesn't just shame you, it erases you. That was the night I felt myself disappearing in plain sight. The silence after humiliation is the cruelest of all. Not one voice rose to defend me. Not one person said, "That's not true." Even the younger grandson, who kept his head down, remained mute, perhaps afraid, perhaps unsure, but still silent. Their lack of protest was its own form of betrayal, louder than laughter, sharper than words. To watch injustice unfold and remain silent is to choose a side, and that night, they all chose against me. I pushed my plate away before touching it. No one noticed. No one asked why I wasn't eating. The family carried on, laughter rising again, conversations skipping over me as if I were a ghost. And perhaps I was. Perhaps that was how they already saw me. Not a living woman with thoughts, memories, and dignity, but an object cluttering the edges of their lives. Something to tolerate until it could finally be discarded. If you believe that no one deserves to be treated as invisible inside their own family, inscreva-se agora para acompanhar mais histórias como essa. That night, I sat alone by the window long after everyone had gone to bed. I replayed my son's words over and over until they carved themselves into my chest. Just sit down, Mom. You're only going to make a mess. A lifetime of sacrifices undone by a single sentence. A reputation of strength reduced to laughter. My legacy diminished to silence. I realized then that humiliation is not just about what others said, is about what they force you to believe about yourself. And for the first time, I wondered if they were succeeding in rewriting my worth. Have you ever been laughed at by the very people you sacrificed everything for? Have you ever felt the sting of humiliation in a place that was supposed to be your sanctuary? Tell me in the comments, because sharing your truth might be the first step in reclaiming the respect they thought they could strip away. The days after that dinner blurred together, but something small began to shift. It wasn't dramatic at first. No declarations, no confrontations, just little things. Things only someone who truly saw me would do. My grandson, Daniel, the younger one, the quiet one, had always been more observant than the rest. He wasn't loud, he wasn't cruel, and though he often stayed silent when others ignored me, I noticed his eyes. He was watching. He saw what they pretended wasn't happening. He saw me. The first time it happened, I almost didn't notice. I had gone to my room early, unable to face the family laughter spilling out of the living room. My chest still burned from my son's words, and the echo of my granddaughter's laughter rang in my ears like a punishment. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, when there was a soft knock at the door. Not a heavy knock, not demanding, gentle. I hesitated before answering. Then the door creaked open, and Daniel slipped inside, holding a small plate in his hands. "You didn't eat much," he said simply, placing it on my nightstand. It was a sandwich, cut unevenly, with chips on the side. Nothing grand, but everything I needed in that moment. I looked at him, surprised, but before I could speak, he smiled shyly. "Don't let them take your appetite, Grandma." Then he slipped back out as quietly as he had come. It wasn't just the food, it was the acknowledgement. He had noticed me, noticed that I had pushed my plate away, noticed the weight on my shoulders. And in his small act of kindness, he had returned something I thought I had lost forever, my dignity. The next evening, it happened again. This time, it was a cookie wrapped in a napkin. He handed it to me with a grin and whispered, "Don't tell Mom. She says sugar at night ruins your brain." The mischief in his voice, the light in his eyes, it made me laugh for the first time in weeks. A real laugh, not forced, not polite, but alive. And when I laughed, I saw something shift in him too, relief, as if he had been waiting to see me come back from the edge of invisibility. Little by little, this became our routine. At night, when the house grew quiet and the others retreated into their comfortable worlds, Daniel came to me, sometimes with food, sometimes with a blanket, sometimes with nothing but his presence. He sat at the foot of my bed or in the chair by the window and simply talked. He told me about school, about his dreams, about how he didn't know what he wanted to be yet but knew he wanted to make a difference. He listened to me too, asking about Richard, about the past, about how things used to be, and with every question, every smile, every knock on my door, he stitched back together the pieces of me that his father and mother had tried to tear apart. Hope is a dangerous thing. It sneaks in quietly, when you least expect it, when you've already convinced yourself there's nothing left to salvage. Daniel's gestures were small, almost invisible in the grand scheme of things, but to me they were monumental. They reminded me that I was still human, still valuable, still worthy of being cared for. For the first time in months, I felt warmth not from the house, but from one person inside it who refused to let me fade into nothingness. One evening, he came in holding a book. "I thought you might like this," he said, placing it in my lap. It was an old novel, the kind I used to read when Michael was little. "I found it in the attic," Daniel explained. "It has your name written inside." I opened the first page and there it was, my handwriting, my initials, a note I had written decades ago. My throat tightened. He had brought back not just a book, but a part of myself I thought had been erased. Another night I overheard an argument in the kitchen. Rachel was complaining about expenses again, her voice sharp with irritation. "We can't keep supporting her like this. It's draining us." Michael muttered his agreement. I sat in my room, heart pounding, waiting for the familiar sting of betrayal to consume me. But then, Daniel slipped inside once more, carrying a flashlight and a pack of crackers. He must have heard too. He didn't mention it, didn't try to soothe me with empty words. He just sat down beside me and clicked on the flashlight, aiming it at the ceiling like a star. "It looks like a constellation," he said softly, drawing patterns with the light. He gave me something else to focus on, something beautiful when all I felt was despair. Those moments, those nights, became my anchor. Every whisper of betrayal outside my door was countered by his presence inside it. Every silence at the dinner table was replaced by our quiet conversations at night. Every insult I swallowed was healed by his simple acts of love. I realized something profound then. Respect isn't a gift given by bloodlines, it is a choice. My son had chosen to erase me. My daughter-in-law had chosen to mock me. My granddaughter had chosen to laugh at me. But Daniel had chosen differently. He had chosen to see me, to acknowledge my pain, to stand beside me even when it meant standing against his own family's indifference. And that choice made all the difference. The more time I spent with him, the stronger I felt. My spine straightened, my voice steadied, my eyes lifted again. He didn't just feed me food. He fed me back my sense of self. He reminded me that I was not a burden, not useless, not invisible. I was Eleanor. And I still mattered. Have you ever been defended by someone when you least expected it? Someone who noticed your pain when everyone else ignored it? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the smallest acts of loyalty become the greatest turning points in a life they tried to erase. The night of the turning point was not planned, but life rarely warns you when the ground beneath your feet is about to shift. It began like any other evening, with the clatter of dishes, the murmurs of conversation, and the heavy silence that wrapped itself around me like a shroud. I had learned to expect nothing, to sit quietly and accept my invisibility. But Daniel was different that night. I could see it in the way he glanced at me, his jaw set tighter than usual, his eyes burning with something unspoken. Dinner had barely begun when Rachel's voice sliced through the air. "We really need to finalize the paperwork soon. This situation can't go on forever." She said it so casually, as though I weren't sitting just a few feet away, as though my life could be reduced to paperwork. My fork trembled against the plate, but I said nothing. I never said anything. Silence had become my shield, my last fragile defense against their cruelty. But before I could lower my eyes, Daniel slammed his fork down with a sharp clang. The room froze. Everyone turned to look at him, startled by the sound. His voice was calm, but firm, deeper than I'd ever heard it before. "Stop talking about her like she's not here." The words hit the air like a stone thrown into still water. Rachel blinked, stunned. Michael's face darkened, his authority challenged in his own home. My granddaughter let out a nervous laugh, trying to diffuse the tension, but Daniel didn't back down. He turned his gaze directly on his father, unflinching. "She is sitting right there. You keep treating her like she's nothing. But she's the reason any of us are even here." I felt my chest tighten, not from fear but from something I hadn't felt in a long time: vindication. My grandson had spoken the words I had buried deep inside my soul, words I longed to scream but no longer had the strength to say. Michael's voice came low, controlled, but brimming with anger. "Daniel, this is not your place." "Yes, it is," Daniel shot back, his tone unwavering. "Because if you won't respect your own mother, then someone has to. I won't sit here and listen to you erase her." The silence that followed was suffocating. I searched their narrowed eyes, Emily's smirk fading, Michael's clenched jaunt. Then I looked at Daniel, his shoulders squared, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice steady. He was afraid, yes, but his courage outshone the fear. Rachel tried to regain control. You don't understand, Daniel. This isn't about disrespect, it's about practicality. She's getting older, and older doesn't mean worthless. Daniel snapped, cutting her off. His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth, breaking through years of silence. You laugh at her. You whisper about her. You make plans behind her back. Do you think I don't hear it? Do you think I don't see what you're doing? You treat her like she's a burden, but she carried this family her whole life. She is the strongest person in this room, and you treat her like she's disposable. My heart pounded, tears threatening at the edges of my eyes. I had dreamed of this moment, of someone standing up for me, but I never imagined it would come from the youngest voice at the table. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of silence lift, replaced by a surge of pride. He was not just defending me, he was restoring me. Michael's face hardened. That's enough. No, Daniel said, his voice clear, steady, louder this time. It's not enough. You've been pretending she doesn't matter, but I won't let you. Not anymore. And then he did something that silenced even Rachel. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands trembling, only slightly, and tapped the screen. A recording played, Rachel's voice filling the room. She's taking up space. We can't keep doing this. Michael, we need to think about a nursing home. Then my son's voice followed. We'll say it's for her own good. She's lucky we're even planning anything. The blood drained from Michael's face. Rachel stammered, reaching across the table, but Daniel held the phone steady, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. You think no one notices? You think you can plot in whispers and hide behind smiles? But I've heard everything, and I won't let you destroy her. It was as if the walls themselves trembled. I sat frozen, the sound of their betrayal echoing in my ears, but this time I wasn't alone. My words had been stolen from me, but Daniel had returned them with more power than I could have ever spoken myself. For the first time, I felt as though I had a voice again, carried through his defiance, his courage, his refusal to let the truth be buried. Rachel's lips parted, but no words came. Emily looked down, her smirk gone, and Michael, my son, the boy I once rocked to sleep, stared at the table as if it might open and swallow him whole. Shame hung thick in the air, but it wasn't mine anymore. Se esse momento de justiça já fez o seu coração bater mais forte, clique em gostei agora, para que essa história chegue a mais pessoas. I looked at Daniel, my heart swelling with pride, gratitude, and something deeper, a spark of hope I thought had died long ago. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence was enough. His courage was enough. Through him, I had been heard, defended, valued. For the first time in years, I was not invisible. Have you ever had someone speak up for you when you had no strength left to defend yourself? Someone who carried your truth when everyone else tried to silence it? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes it is the courage of one voice that awakens the power we thought we had lost forever. When the shouting died down and the air in the dining room turned heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, I didn't say a word. My silence was no longer weakness, it was power. I had lived long enough to know that some wars are not fought with fists or fury, but with patience and quiet decisions made in the shadows. My son lowered his head, ashamed. My daughter-in-law pursed her lips in thin defiance, and my granddaughter shifted in her seat, her bravado evaporating in the presence of Daniel's courage. But me, I sat taller than I had in years. For the first time in so long, I felt my dignity return, not because they gave it back, but because someone I loved reminded me I had never truly lost it. That night, when the house finally fell silent, I sat in my room with the small lamp glowing beside me. My mind wasn't clouded with fear anymore. It was sharp, clear, steady. I pulled out a notebook I had hidden in the drawer, one I used to keep recipes in, and began to write. I wrote names, dates, details. I wrote down the sacrifices, the betrayals, the laughter at my expense, the moments of cruelty wrapped in casual words. But I also wrote the small acts of love, the knock on my door, the plate of food, the whispered jokes, the voice that had risen for me when mine had been stolen. By the time the ink dried on the page, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The decision came quietly, like the first breath after a storm. Everything I owned, everything I had built, everything that carried the weight of my years would no longer belong to those who erased me. My house, my savings, the photographs, the heirlooms, all of it would go to Daniel. The boy who had become more of a man in one night than his father had in decades. The only one who looked at me and still saw Eleanor, not a burden, not a shadow, not an inconvenience. I could already hear their protests, their accusations. How could you go against your own son? They would demand. But the truth is, blood may define relation, but respect defines family. And Daniel had chosen me when they all had chosen to erase me. That choice was enough. The next morning, I dressed with care, brushing my hair, smoothing my clothes. I looked in the mirror and whispered to my reflection, "You still matter." For the first time in years, the words didn't feel like a plead, they felt like a declaration. I carried my notebook and a folder of documents Daniel had helped me gather, and I walked with steady steps. I was not sneaking, not hiding, but moving with the quiet confidence of someone who has already decided their fate. At the lawyer's office, I explained everything with clarity. My voice did not shake. I wasn't driven by anger or revenge, I was driven by justice. Justice for myself, for the years of sacrifice, for the dignity they tried to erase but failed. I signed the papers with a steady hand, and with each stroke of ink, I felt lighter, freer. It wasn't about punishing the it was about rewarding the only one who had earned the right to carry my legacy. When I returned home, no one noticed. Rachel didn't look up from her phone. Michael muttered something about bills. Emily rolled her eyes when Daniel excused himself to walk me inside. But I noticed the strength in my step, the calm in my chest, the spark of life in my eyes. They could ignore me, but they could no longer erase me. My decision had already rewritten the future. That evening, Daniel came to my room like he always did. He didn't ask what I had done, but he looked at me with eyes that seemed to know. He sat beside me in silence, and for the first time, I allowed myself to cry, not from sorrow, but from relief. He put his arm around me, steady and warm, and I realized that in him I had found not just a defender, but an heir to my strength, my story, my truth. I had been called useless, erased, humiliated, but I refused to let that be the end of my story. My end would be marked by dignity, by justice, by the choice to give everything I had to the one person who proved I was still worth everything. And if you were me, would you hand over everything to someone who truly saw your worth, even if it meant going against your own child? If stories like this make you reflect on the value of family, subscribe now so you don't miss the next ones. And when the screen fades, let these words remain. Silence doesn't erase truth, it stores it. Until someone brave enough lets it speak. Life has a way of testing us in moments we least expect, stripping us of the very things we believed were permanent: respect, love, belonging. But there is something they can never take away from us, no matter how hard they try: the truth of who we are. They may laugh, they may whisper, they may turn their faces away and act as though we no longer matter. But dignity cannot be erased by silence, and worth cannot be stolen by betrayal. The years I lived were not years of nothingness. They were filled with sacrifices, victories, and a love so deep it shaped generations. Even if my own son forgot, even if my daughter-in-law mocked, even if my granddaughter laughed, those truths cannot be undone. Faith taught me something powerful in my darkest hours: that pain is not the end, it is the doorway to revelation. When everything around you collapses, when the voices closest to you declare you useless, that is when the voice inside you must rise and remind you of what no one can erase. I learned that survival is not about staying silent. Survival is about choosing when and how to let your truth be known. For me, that truth emerged not in my own shout, but in the steady, courageous voice of my grandson. God places people in our lives for reasons we may not always understand, and sometimes the defenders we never expected become the very instruments of our deliverance. Hope does not always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes with a plate of food left quietly on your nightstand. Sometimes it comes with a knock at your door when you thought no one cared. Sometimes it comes in the form of a young man standing up at a dinner table, refusing to let injustice go unchallenged. That is the beauty of life. It reminds us, often through the least expected hands, that we are still seen, still valued, still worth fighting for. And in that recognition, I found the courage to take back control of my story, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity and strength. I realized that what I leave behind should never be measured in blood alone, but in loyalty, in respect, in love proven through action. To those who erased me, I owe nothing. To the one who saw me, defended me, and reminded me that my voice still mattered, I owe everything, and that decision filled me with peace greater than any apology could have brought. It is easy to believe that betrayal defines us, but betrayal is not the end, is the mirror that reveals the depth of our strength. I have lived enough years to know that storms do not last forever, that darkness cannot stop the dawn. I believe with all my heart that when people strip away your worth, God restores it through unexpected ways. My faith carried me when my family turned against me, and that faith showed me that no humiliation is final when truth still has breath. Perhaps you too have faced moments when you felt invisible, when the very people you poured yourself into treated you as if you were nothing. Perhaps you've wondered if your sacrifices were in vain, if your life had been reduced to silence. But let me tell you, your worth is not measured by their blindness. It is measured by the love you gave, the strength you carried, and the fact that you are still here. And as long as you are here, there is still purpose in your life. I choose to believe that every scar carries a story, every betrayal holds a hidden lesson, and every moment of pain can be transformed into a source of strength. My story is not one of defeat, but of renewal. My voice may have been quieted, but through Daniel, it was restored. My heart may have been broken, but through truth, it was healed. And my dignity may have been mocked, but through faith, it stands taller than ever. So when you feel forgotten, remember this: silence is not the end of your story. Silence is the soil where truth waits, ready to bloom the moment courage waters it. Hold fast, for your defender may already be closer than you think, and when they rise for you, when they speak for you, you will remember what I remembered, that worth is never lost, only hidden until the right moment brings it back into the light. If this story has spoken to your heart, take a moment now to leave a like and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories of truth, dignity, and transformation. And don't miss the next video, where another hidden betrayal is uncovered and a 30-year secret finally comes to light. You won't want to miss what happens when the truth no longer stays buried.